kinds of sheltering options. One, we were able to serve singles, couples, and pets on this site. It's a non-congregate site, and I will explain some of those differences a little bit later between congregate shelter, non-congregate shelter, and the advantages and disadvantages from just I don't really like to say disadvantages, just the advantages as a continuum. Clearly, one of them is being able to bring in pets and couples into a shelter site, which historically we haven't done a lot of in our congregate shelters. Although we were able to serve couples at the 2020 shelter or the Everett United Church of Christ as well, but not necessarily in their own units. That is a congregate setting. The Palisades is also a low barrier shelter, and I think it's important to have some good distinctions there when we talk about what low barrier means. One, I want to just begin with, it's not a no barrier project in that not anybody and everybody can come in, but even once they're in, there are some program expectations. Mainly, we don't allow use of substances on the property. So that's generally what would be, say, a no barrier, or like a wet site is one of the terms that's been used colloquially. But we don't allow use on the property, but we don't require sobriety to become a part or a member of the program. So you can still be somebody who is in use, you just can't use on our property. Another element that's unique, I think fairly unique about the project, is the public-private nature of the funding. There is a lot of public dollars through the city of Everett, and there's a number of dollars privately through Everett Gospel Mission and our donors to make this project happen, particularly with the expansion in 2022, which we'll look at in a minute. But I think it's been a really successful and affordable project. When we look at the cost of these kinds of projects around the country, our cost of operating on a per night basis is much lower than what you'd see in a lot of other sites. So we'll be able to talk about what we learned about that and why our contract amount has gone up from year 1 to year 2, and what we're accomplishing with some of those increased dollars. So I just wanted to show you a couple pictures here. This is a beginning shot of our first 20 units. You'll notice at the end of the row there, so first of all, you see the asphalt. That's because we wanted 4 ADA units. So those 4 units you're looking at on the left side there, beginning with the number 2, are actually accessible units. And at the end of that row is a porta potty. That's what we had available for 1 year on this project, was a couple porta potties around the property. And again, it was pilot. We weren't sure how much money we were going to really invest in the longevity of this site, how successful it would be. So we went with something that was fairly easy to remove in the short run. Here's a picture of just what a unit looks like when one of our clients move in. So this is nice. A lot of our donors at the mission, they fund these, so it's about $750 in materials that we put inside the units, and so we just ask our community to fund that, and we have a number of donors who do write us a check to make sure that every client that moves in, or when we turn over a unit, gets to move into a unit that's not just empty, but has a nice welcoming package, if you will, to moving in. One of the fun things that we get to do on this project that's a lot different is the first thing that we do when we do an intake is, before we sit down in our office with them, we take them to their unit and we give them a key. And they get to go into their unit first. And there's some good strategy to that, in that we're about to go into an office and ask them a lot of invasive questions during an intake. And the last thing we want is for our clients not to trust us and to believe that if they tell us something that they are scared to tell us, they might result in them not being able to stay a part of the project. So we want to make it really clear, you have your key. There's nothing you can tell us in this intake time that is going to result in you not being a part of this project. We have already said yes, and we're on your team. And I do think that really helps, because we get a lot of history and a lot of information from them as we go along, so that ultimately we can help build case management plans, and as a community better support their needs, just understanding where they're at today and how we can help them get where they want to go tomorrow. So 2022, we did an expansion. We added 20 more units, so we have a total of 40 client units on the property. But over that year, between 2021 and 2022, we also learned that there's a number of things that we didn't have in place that, from our experience in running congregate shelters and just our experience in in relational poverty alleviation, we realized we needed to improve. Some of those have to do with community spaces. So we added a community room. So in that photo you're looking at there, that bottom most near unit that's the largest is a 400 square foot community room. That allows, and that's open 24/7, so the clients can go in there whenever they want throughout the day. We can gather with them if we have service providers come onto the property and we don't have an office space available, or they're not necessarily comfortable meeting in an individual's unit, or the individual having them meet in their unit, they can use the community space to meet with them. So it's been a really beneficial improvement to the overall outcomes and engagement with the clients. We're also able to do classes in there if we have classes available to do. We can do community or house meetings. Our house meetings, that's such a congregate shelter term. So it's more like neighborhood meetings, if you will, because we've broken the community into little neighborhoods. So that's been a good improvement. We also added 2 offices. So when we first started, we didn't have any office space on the property. We had them up at the men's shelter. So if you haven't been down there, the men's shelter is that gray building directly behind the pallet units. So we had office spaces up there. We had bathrooms up there, showers up there. We did the laundry up there. So really we had the pallet units were on the property. Was their bedroom, if you will, and a lot of the services that we were able to provide in year 1 were up at the men's mission. We found some challenges with that. We had some clients that did not feel comfortable going into the men's mission for whatever reason. And so we were delivering food down to them, but also made it difficult for them to participate in group and community meetings if we had them at the men's mission. And again, we realized these units aren't large. The bedroom units, they're 64 square feet. They have their bed in there. They have their personal belongings in there. Some of them have a number of personal belongings. Some of them have less personal belongings. So meeting in their units with other clients is challenging. So the community space really provided a space where they could do that better. The offices also allowed for our staff to be on site when they were there to work. So Andrew is there 5 days a week, and his office is on that site, and he's able to engage with the clients. Because he's closer and they don't have to go up to the building. As he's walking around, there's just natural interactions that happen throughout the day in just his normal activities that he's able to engage with the clients in a way that we weren't able to in year 1. A couple other things we learned. Very interesting one when we first started. We assumed the mission will just provide the food. So that's something that is subsidized or makes this project a little bit more affordable, is all the meals are provided by the mission. And we thought, well, that's good. That'll be fine. What we didn't expect was the clients would want to cook their own food. That's not something we've really experienced a lot of in our congregate shelters. And so we had clients bringing in their propane stoves and putting them in front of their units. And as you can imagine, that makes us feel fairly uncomfortable. It's not that we didn't trust they knew how to use them. They've been using them for decades in their camps. It's that our insurance probably didn't like the idea of that happening right outside their units. So we heard that and realized we need to establish some outdoor cooking areas. So you'll see some pictures shortly of how we did that to provide that space to the clients as a part of this expansion. We also realized we did need to increase the staff. So our first year was a pretty lean staffing model. If you remember, the nature of the project was a lot about how do we help clean up Smith Avenue, and how do we help provide a space for people who were living on the streets of Everett to have a dignified, compassionate place to go so that we can enforce some of the laws that were on the books. So this project was partly to help that happen, and it definitely did. We also realized for us to have more success and move people along, there needs to be a higher nature of engagement with our staff. And so we requested to add more case management to that staff. We have a staff member that comes on 20 hours a week just to keep the facilities clean. We were used to, in our other sites, a lot of times the clients will do a lot of that work. It's not how this site works currently. And so we have that staff does that, takes care of the bathrooms, takes care of all the community spaces, just to make sure those spaces stay clean and dignified for all of our clients that are there. And some of that has to do, the staffing here, because it's a lower barrier shelter, the degree of mental health that we are allowing onto the property is higher. the mental health needs. And so there's a lot of folks who would not normally go into a congregate shelter due to social anxiety disorders and other conditions that just don't allow them to be around people in more confined spaces that this particular project works really well for. It also means that we have to have a little bit more intensive staff and management and oversight of that. And we as staff have to do a little bit more of the work. So that's why we have some higher levels of staffing. Well, the other element was just bathrooms. The porta potties in the winter, it's cold. And the porta potties are really challenging to heat. And so we really wanted to get the bathrooms on the site. And the city had an ADA unit, which is what you see on that upper right of the picture there. So the left side is the ADA and shower, and the right side is a bathroom. And then we also just, as we looked at that, we thought, okay, there's a lot of people that are going to be on this property. 2 bathrooms really isn't enough. And so the mission purchased a trailer, which you'll see in a bit, that has 3 bathrooms with showers in it as well. So we have a total of 5 toilets and 4 showers on the property now to service the needs. Now here's something really interesting we didn't expect. The showers were put in a certain spot on the property because that's where the sewage was. And it's on the very opposite end of our farthest units. And so you have to walk all the way across the property if you're in some of our southeast units, I believe it is. That is when we still had the porta potties there, they were still choosing to use the porta potties and go for the shorter walk than walk all the way across the property. And so we've actually continued to have the porta potties on the property just to make that more convenient and make sure they have access to the bathrooms and use them. We have had a lot of experience at other sites that when you don't make bathrooms accessible, they don't always get used, or the clients will figure out ways to service those needs inside their units and then have to pour them out somewhere else. And so that's just not something we wanted to deal with. And I mean, I've been on some sites in LA that the walk was extensive, and I would have trouble getting there. And the average age of our clients on this project is 51 years old, with the oldest being 80. And so having a long walk to a bathroom doesn't make a lot of sense. So creating good bathroom access is just good customer-centric care and dignified. So we keep that going. Okay, so the pictures you're about to see, I went over to the site Friday. We didn't have actually, Andrew was on vacation and I had to work in my office. So we didn't have staff on the site that day. We have 24/7 security. We didn't have EGM staff. So this is what it looked like after a day from last Friday. And this is right, this bottom or left picture is at the front gate when you walk in. So there's some unique parts about this. It is an access controlled gate, and only staff and security have that code and are able to open that gate. So the clients do not have the ability to open and close that gate. They have to be let on the property by security and off the property by security. The gate is open for entry between 6 a.m. and 12 p.m., 12 a.m., 11:59 p.m. 12 to 6, you can't enter the property, so that's a bit of a curfew. You can always leave. So if you want to leave at 1 a.m., you can do that. You just won't be able to get back on until 6 a.m. Some other things you'll notice in there, the first building you see on the right there's some cameras on it. So one of the things that we learned early on is we needed to install a lot of cameras. So I think there's a total of 19 or 20 cameras on the property that are all around the perimeter, and we have access to view every doorway, so we can just know who's going in and out of units and all around the property, so we can know. Without the cameras, we did have a few entrances onto the property that were not welcome, because chain link fences aren't that hard to cut. And so we had a couple folks come on and have some guests, and we had to nail that down. And once we got the cameras in place, we haven't had any unwelcome or unapproved attendance on the property. To the left of there, you'll see the lockers and the carport, at least left of the entrance in the bottom right corner. That is what we call amnesty lockers. And those lockers, when we say amnesty, we mean we don't ask any questions about what's in those lockers. So as a property that's trying to say we don't want you to use in your unit, we don't want you to have drugs or paraphernalia in your unit or weapons. And so we ask that you put those in the lockers when you come on the property, and you can access those. They all have their own locks. I don't know the combinations to those locks. If we had to get in, we'd have to cut the lock, and so they would know that we did that. And again, that's trying to establish that degree of trust in managing this interesting line we're walking on this property of building trust, trying to support their recovery while also not requiring sobriety to be a part of it. So as you heard, they're not allowed to have paraphernalia or drugs in their units. If they do, we'll explore a little bit of what we do when they do, if that comes up. I won't go into too many weeds, but we certainly can, if we have time, we can explain policies and practices as we go along. That upper right picture, you'll see that's the community kitchen, which I have a more close-up picture later, but to the right of it's left of the gate. You'll see there's a couple outdoor tables for sitting, there's a community kitchen, and then those are the two bathrooms. So you have the pallet-provided bathroom as well as the trailer. So it's just a view of the property down the main line. We've got, I think it's eight units down each lane, if you will. And then it goes 6 across. What you'll notice, and that obviously the first thing you see there is there's a couple units that look a little different. Those units are new models that Pallet is prototyping. And so they came to the city and the city said, oh yeah, we would love you to give those to us. And so the city, Pallet provided those. We're testing them out. We just started getting people into them this week, actually. They are structurally, they're more well insulated, they're quieter. The other big improvement they'll make is you'll notice the door's not right in the middle. The door is actually to the left, and I have close-up pictures of this later, but it has a lot to do with feedback they got from our site and other sites that most sites are not putting 2 people in these 64 square foot units. We did when we first started. If we had a couple come on, we were happy to allow the couple to stay in the unit. We learned pretty quickly that doesn't work very well. They're really small, and from one of the biggest challenges we've had is just personal property management. And so when we would go deal with personal property, we got a lot of, that's not my stuff, that's his stuff, and then that's not my stuff, that's her stuff. And then we'd have to figure out, well, it's just going. And because we have some rules around what you can leave in the community spaces, which has been a maturing process. Like we had a lot more freedom when we started, and I think we've learned a lot how we have to zero in and create some more clearly defined boundaries. So most sites don't put 2 people in the 64 square foot
One
units.
question on that. So community space, is that everything outside of the unit then?
That's correct.
So all the, okay.
Yeah, I think, that's
That, like this one has one of those big tubs.
yeah, so the next, I think that's the next photo we're on
Oh,
there,
okay.
right? Yeah, correct. So when we look at these pictures here, again, this was Friday, I took these pictures, and I think they're good samples of just how different people are utilizing the space around their property. So as you look at, that's unit number 34 that has the tarp, and it has a tub in front. So everybody has the ability to store a wheeled cart next to their unit. We learned early on there's a lot of folks that have their bicycles, and you've seen them around town. They got their bicycle with a cart. We didn't have a plan for that when we started. And to be honest with you, we reviewed a lot of other properties from around the country. A lot. There was like 20 when we started this. So we looked at a number of the different protocols, and they just didn't have anything about bicycles really or personal property around. They just said you can't store anything around your units. That became really challenging for us, particularly like, what do we do with these bicycle carts? It's clear they use them to go to the grocery store. They use them to move their personal property around. And so we allowed them to store the carts. Eventually we got to a policy that simply said we have to be able to come up and move it. So it has to be a working cart, and we have to move it, and anything that doesn't move on the cart is out of compliance and will be removed. So that was how we created that boundary. I will tell you, it probably took 4 iterations to get to that, because it was like, well, yeah, you can have a cart. And then the cart became, like you go to cash and carry or US Foods, and the cart, had one of those on the site at one point. I'm like, no, you can't pull that with your bike, that's gotta go. And so you can even hear in that, there was a big learning curve for us in helping our security understand how to let stuff onto the property, how to say no, how we get good practices in place to ensure that we have limited amount of property coming on. At the end of the day, it really came down to Andrew really developing some excellent weekly inspection protocols that even at the gate, the entry, because we could say you can have one small backpack when you come through the gate. What we learned is if somebody had a bunch of stuff, they have friends on the property. And suddenly one person would come on and 4 people would follow them with backpacks. And it would go to that one unit. So the clients would help each other out. And I'm not saying these in any way to disparage our clients. They're creative. They've been surviving on the streets, some of them for decades. And they're creative in how they get to where they want and need to be. And we just had to be creative in how we create clear boundaries for them. And so our weekly inspections is how we got there. You'll notice like in Unit 16, she's got a lot of plants and other items around her unit. This is probably the unit that has the most stuff around it, yet she keeps it the most organized and has worked with us along the way to make sure she could do that and didn't just kind of do it and then force us to say no. It's more worked with us. She also does a lot of work in managing. You'll see we have some gardens and some other spaces, and she helps manage a lot of those. So she gives back to the community quite a bit and has stayed in compliance. She's never failed a weekly inspection, and so it's really easy to kind of give a little bit more latitude as we go along with the client. Unit 38, she's got a little tree. She's got a chair in front behind the tree. She's got a little display. Those are all in compliance with our community property expectations. So it gives you a good picture of 3 different ways clients have managed the outside of their property, or their unit, I should say, in their community spaces. We do, Andrew or the staff will come in the morning at 9 o'clock, and they'll walk the property, and anybody that's out of compliance, they will write a little note and put it on their door saying these things are out of compliance. If they're not addressed by 3 o'clock today, we'll remove them. And then we just remove those items. Now, we do have a learning curve with newer clients. If you've been there a while, we're not knocking on your door and asking you, are you okay? It's like, you know what we're doing. This is going away. Our newer clients, we let them know that can't be there. And so we really work hard to make sure they understand the expectations. So here's some pictures of the community spaces around the property. So you've got the gazebo, you got the outdoor kitchen. That's an internal shot of the classrooms, and then you can also see the gardens on some garden bins. I don't know what those are called. Raised beds, thank you. That's great. Thanks for the assist on that one. We got some raised beds. They were set up like that, kind of specifically to try to create more spaces around the property to sit. And so there's a table in one. We're acquiring a table for the second one. We got the gazebo with the table in it and all that gardening around. That's actually where one of the staff I'll tell you about, she's done a lot of work this summer with them in engaging in plant life care and learning, even going around and learning what are the plants that you can use to heal a cut and to make tea out of. And so she's done a great job of helping them understand how to forage from just in our community and engage with them. So it's an important part of working with this population is just how do we find activities where we can engage with them relationally and not just about the tasks or the work that has to be accomplished to get out of the property. You see there's an outdoor sink. When we got the bathroom, we kind of cut into the outdoor heater or the heater that was in the bathroom. It's a tankless heater. We added some piping so we could have the sink there for them. And then there's a barbecue and a couple burners in the propane. So, and that's used fairly regularly.
So do they have access to refrigeration?
They do. So they have a refrigerator in their unit, just a small one.
Okay, that's what
And then
I
in the
was
community
curious.
room, I don't have it in this picture, there's a larger, it's not huge, but there's a larger one for larger items that they can store refrigerated items in. Well, here's the up close of the new model that they're moving towards, and there are some significantly nice improvements in this. You'll notice there's built-in shelving on the walls. There's a little desk. Probably the most significant improvement is the bed. The old model, the beds are higher, uncomfortably high, and most of us couldn't sit in those beds and have our feet on the ground, and narrower. And so it's probably one of the biggest complaints we got is the bed's just too small. We've had some clients that have had to put something on the edge of it just to make sure they don't roll off because it's 24 inches wide maybe. It's not very wide. So the new model is much wider and lower, so it's much more accommodating to the population that we're serving here. And again, interesting improvements. The door. The old doors are multiple pieces, and so if somebody has something in the way and they go to close the door, the bottom part will fall out, and so we have to replace and repair that. This is your more standard door. And so we're able to not have that problem with the door. They're thicker, they're more energy efficient. And so in that sense, they're probably more effective from an operational cost, although I can't promise you that because we just started putting people in them. But they're even testing different heating and cooling systems within the units. I didn't say that, but all the units have air conditioning and heating in them. And that's a good thing. And then these particular units, the new ones are about 2-inch walls. The old ones are 1/2-inch walls. So it's much better efficiency in these new units. Little things like they put the circuit breaker outside instead of inside. That was a big request we had. Found it really difficult having that inside. And they even actually had a circuit breaker for the smoke alarm, which is not good. Like we don't allow smoking in the units, but if the smoke alarm can be turned off and the battery taken out, then we can't manage that. And so one of the things we had to do is we added tamper-proof tape to all the smoke alarms so we could see if they were either removed or the battery was taken out. These are kind of learning curve stuff that as a congregate shelter provider traditionally, we didn't know. We had to learn and just figure out what do you do here and how do you manage some of these things. Here's some of the services that are provided on the site, as well as a fun picture of one of our clients I'll tell you about. But so we've got food, clothing, and laundry. All those services are provided at EGM's expense. So that's where this is that public-private partnership. And then beyond that, we've got security and site management, the waste management. There is case management provided both internally and externally. We have some great partners. The city is, I just met some of the new contracted city case managers today from Bridgeway, so that was great to see them on the site and know that we've got more people coming in to support this population. We got a community activity coordinator. That's the person who's doing a lot of the work around the plants and classes, and so that's a model we're incorporating in more. One of the things we found is when Andrew is operating the site and having to do some, we'll call it, for lack of a better term, corrective actions, it's also hard to be not only the community engagement person, but the corrective action person. And so it's nice to have those separated, even though we do try to keep them coordinating well and partnering together. Yeah, so there's a listing of some of the agencies that have come in. LEAD, Mercy Watch, we have Housing Navigator that comes on once a week. And then we are building relationships with some of the substance use treatment centers to come on site and engage with and market to our clients as well. So we're seeing more and more service providers on the site than we ever have over the last few months. This is a picture of one of our early clients, Derek, who went to treatment and then from treatment moved into a clean and sober housing and has stayed stable and in that housing for over a year now. And so is really, I think he was one of our earliest success stories from a moving out. I do have to caveat, a big part of this project is early on we were concerned about success into housing being the way we evaluate the success of this project. Partly, getting into permanent housing is difficult in our communities. So just to put that in perspective, if you're in coordinated entry, about 7% of the people in coordinated entry in Snohomish County are going to get housing this year. It's not a huge number. And at any given time, there's anywhere from 12 to 1,500 people on coordinated entry. So we got a lot of people that are waiting for that supportive housing. So we were all concerned early on saying, well, do we say permanent housing is an evaluative factor of this? And it wasn't. We were looking for service engagement and we were looking for stability. We've had really good successes on that, so I'll explain those in a second. But Derek is a great story. And one of the things I asked Derek early on after he came back just to pack up his stuff, as I said, what made you decide to do treatment? And his response was, I decided I didn't want to die anymore. I wanted to live. So I just think there's some interesting elements that as he was able to stabilize and find some community and really move away from his life on the streets, there was something more important and better that he wanted to pursue. And so with his lead case manager and other support, he was able to get into that treatment and have great success. Yeah. So here's some numbers, just so we get a little view over the years. We've served a total of 55 clients at the Pallet Shelter. There's the average age of those 55 clients. Like I said, oldest is 80, youngest is 23. Of those clients that we've served at that 55, 26 currently still live on the project. So that's how many units are full. We are doing intakes now to fill those up. There's a little breakdown of just the length of stay of those 26 clients. So 9 of them have been there 2 or more years, or more than 2 years. 1 to 2 is 10, and then less than a year is 7. Like I said, we have 13 open units, so we'll see that number go up quite a bit in terms of less than 1 year. Over that time, we've exited 29 clients. The big numbers on that page. I mean, that number 1 abandoned, he got a unit, and I don't even know if he ever actually stayed in the unit. He came in, might have stayed one night, but after that, we never saw him again. And there's a story behind that, but not one to be told here. So 8 through violence, that's usually either verbal threats of violence or physical violence. I think we've only had 2 physical acts of violence. The rest are more verbal violence and threats that we considered too excessive to be able to manage and maintain on the site. Then you've got your health, property, and safety. That's a big category. That has a lot to do with, if you're not managing the property in your unit, and we just determine that we've done everything we can to work with you on that. We can't work with you anymore on that. Or you have violated our, we haven't exited anyone for violating our drug use on property policy. We have exited a few folks for what we consider distribution. And so we have a very low to no tolerance for distribution. So we've exited a few folks for that. And the safety violations would include, it might be messing with your smoke detector or just operating in activities that are not safe for the community. Carrying a weapon when you shouldn't have a weapon on the property, those kinds of things. Nobody's been, I think a lot of folks will probably think, oh, this is a pretty dangerous population. It really hasn't been. Yeah, has there been threats? There have been threats, but we've had 1, 2 assaults. One was a guy shoving another guy, and another assault was a domestic violence situation that we addressed very quickly. And then you see there at the bottom, we've housed 6 of our clients that have actually left into permanent housing, and 2 additional clients that went into treatment and then moved into permanent housing. So if you're a numbers person, which I didn't do the math at first, and then somebody reminded me, so that's 8 total. So if you look at just the total exits, 25% of our exits have exited into permanent housing. If you look at just the total clients served, 14% of the people who have exited the project have exited into permanent housing. And if you remember that number earlier, that's twice what our going rate is in coordinated entry. It's a much smaller population, admittedly, but it's a nice number. We'll see if it holds. It's a challenging population with a lot of needs. You'll see there in the co-occurring presenting issues, a lot of our clients are coming in with 3 or more of those issues that they're facing with, from medical to mental health to physical disabilities to years. We have some clients that have been on the streets for decades. And I think I'm really close, Julie. I'm good. All right. I put this in here. I'm not going to do a bunch of work, but I thought it would be a good service to just think about considerations when we think about non-congregate and congregate. So I'm always an advocate, and I think most of us are advocates for a continuum of solutions in our community for housing solutions, from emergency shelter to permanent housing. And those emergency shelters being non-congregate, congregate, lower barrier, higher barrier. Probably one of the things we lack the most in our community is a shelter to provide for those with the most significant mental health needs. As much as I would love to say that Pallet could provide that, we can't. There's a lot of times when we we endure more than we thought we were going to, but there's still limits to what we can do safely on that property. And so there are still clients out there that we have exited that don't work there and need to be off our streets and in some sort of care that's much higher level. And that's, I think, a really big gap in our community for all of us. So as you think about those, the non-congregate, the congregate, there are pros and cons. I just wanted to provide that for you as you think about those options. So here's a reminder of the purpose of why we started the pallet shelter on the last page there. It was to seek to serve the city's most challenging to serve. Those that have been on the streets longest, those that are congregate shelter averse, or what's historically been called shelter averse, or even service averse, is to provide a low barrier shelter option that also is that non-congregate option. So again, we have now a low barrier shelter in 2020 and the Everett United Church of Christ, but it's still not a non-congregate. So we still have a population that doesn't do well being in a room full of a bunch of other folks. And so Pallet really, or Palisades, I told you I'd do it, is doing a good job of providing for that. And then of course there was obviously the real felt need of what was happening on Smith Avenue that we needed to be able to address. And I think the city, that neighborhood, all of us work together to provide what has turned out to be an excellent solution to that. And I think there's people now, I can tell them where the mission is, and they don't even know it's down there. Because you're not going to drive by and see street level homelessness. You're not going to see the issues that we were used to seeing down in that neighborhood anymore. So from that perspective, it's been a great success. Almost done. Learning. Big deal, right? 2 years we've been doing this. So when you move from non-congregate or congregate to non-congregate, you have to deal with personal property and more of it. I will tell you, we didn't know anything about hoarding disorder as a mental disorder. And we had to do a lot of learning about that because it is technical. We learned pretty early on. It is the second most diagnosed condition amongst people experiencing homelessness behind depression. It's the second most diagnosed condition in America, but in homelessness, it's 25% of the homeless population are experiencing hoarding disorder. And I just, as an advocate for this and understanding and learning, hoarding disorder is not people who just want to acquire a lot of stuff. It's actually a decision avoidance condition that when they have to make decisions, their brain goes into stress mode. And that's a different approach than somebody who just wants to collect a bunch of stuff. And we had to learn that because we tried a lot of things and they weren't working. And then when we finally got some good training, we started to understand how boundaries really help and what those boundaries need to look like to manage personal property in their units and to just help the individuals experiencing that be more successful. Mental health learning, we're learning quite a bit more about that because we have just a higher need. And unfortunately in our community, getting service providers to provide mental health that are qualified is hard. We have a crisis in that as much as we do in medical care, we have it on the mental health side of hiring staff. And it's not just about being able to afford it because we can throw money at it and there's not people there to do the work is one of the problems we're facing. How we support substance use disorder on a project where we don't allow it on the property, that's been a learning curve and a balance. I think we're still going to continue to learn as an organization and as a community what works and what doesn't work in that. And the last thing there is really just our latest initiative. We're calling it a progressive accountability program. So it's really important to understand this is not permanent housing. Even though people are there a long time, and sometimes our funding sources, our early funding source required that or didn't allow us to have a time limit on it. That's not necessarily a great practice in emergency sheltering. It creates a lot of challenges. And so we don't have that restriction currently. But we also realized we want to help the individuals here progress toward permanent housing and a different life than what they knew on the streets. And so we're writing something where every 90 days they are reestablishing a program agreement with us. And in that they'll work with Andrew to do some low level goal setting. And in that it's we just need a couple goals each 90 days that we're going to move forward on and that we're going to work to help those individuals progress in. And that will allow our staff to continue to have an idea of where somebody's going and how we can support them, but also to continue to press that idea. This isn't permanent housing, and we are moving towards a goal of not living here for a long time, but moving on and into permanent housing. I kept going. You got anything you want to add, Andrew?
Thank you so much, John. Before we open up for questions, I wanted to do a quick time check with Julian. How much time do you think you need for your presentation? Like 5 minutes? Great. Let's open up for questions. Councilor Fossey.
Hi, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I have a ton of questions, so I'll ask a couple and then let somebody else talk before you come back to me. What are your current staffing needs at the site right now? How many bodies? And it's 24/7, I assume?
Yes, 24/7. We have the security there 24/7. So Andrew's there 5 days a week, and then we have a part-time operational support person, and then another opening for a case manager that we have not been able to fill, that we've been working to fill for quite some time. We have that issue around all of our sites in developing, onboarding new case managers, so we haven't been able to fill that one, and that's a pretty critical position.
So how many does that total?
So in an FTE, that's 3 FTE total, and so we've got two operations and 1 case manager.
Oh, okay. But if you're, the way you want to run it though is adding another case manager?
No, I'm sorry, we just haven't had a case manager. We have the funding for it, we haven't been able to fill it.
Yes, so
Yeah.
if you were running it the way it should be, that you want to have it run, it would be 5 people, 5 FTEs?
No, it's so case manager, 2 operations. That's fairly effective because of our external partners, like with LEAD. So LEAD does some case management with a significant number of our clients, and now the city is some case managers. So we're able to supplement and partner with all those across the board. So we're not needing to provide intensive case management to 40 clients. If we needed to provide intensive case management to 40 clients, this is a very, very different conversation.
You said you had 13 available right now?
Correct, yeah.
Is the reason that they're available because it takes some time to turn over the units, or is it processing people coming in?
Yes to both of those. So turnover, processing people coming in. We also paused intakes for a little bit as part of our learning curve. So I talked to you about some of the challenges about property management. That was a really big issue for us, where we had to just pause for a while and say, how do we get this under control? And then we had some just learning. We had a few other things we needed to learn from an operational standpoint. So we felt like we needed to pause until we can get those established and practiced. And then we opened up intakes again, and I think.
And you also had the 6 units that were, you had some units that were injured, and they had to be replaced at the same time that Pallet was able to offer those 6 new units to pilot out. So that also took a little time that required to maintain that vacancy.
Great reminder, thank you.
Yeah.
So you have total 40 units, not 46 units, it's 40 units?
40 units total.
Okay, all right. And then of the people that exited, what sort of housing, the ones that went into actual housing, so the 8, was it supportive housing, transitional housing, regular housing, subsidized housing? Do you know kind of where you had success in having people placed?
It's another yes to all of those, actually. So a couple went into private housing. They were able to afford their own place. Some had subsidized housing. Some went into supportive housing, like Andy's Place and Claire's Place. I think just Andy's Place, actually. So it was a mix. And then a couple, like I said, went into clean and sober housing.
Okay, I have a ton more questions if you guys want to ask some of yours.
Sure. I'd follow up on the vacancies. So I guess, how do people, I'm not sure how to ask this, how do people move in? Like, do they just come to the front desk at EGM and say, I'd like a pallet site, or do they need to get on a list through coordinated entry or something along those lines?
It's actually a referral from the city co-ed. Is it just co-ed, or does it have a new name now? Community support team, thank you. That includes co-ed. So those social workers provide those referrals now. And that's the only way. So we don't do any of our own intakes or referrals as an agency. We receive them from the city and they refer them in.
When do you think you'll start opening up those 13 units for new folks coming in?
Oh, we're doing 2 intakes a week right now.
Oh, great.
So that works well for us. We figured
Okay.
that's a good number.
Yeah.
So we've been doing that for 3 weeks now, I think. So yeah, so we opened up, once we got things sorted out and we got the palette, was able to redo these new models. And we just got the go live on the new models late last week. So yeah, we have 13, and we
Great.
got 2 a week.
Nice. So when I toured the site, we had a great conversation about defining success. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to it, because I get questions often from folks in the community of, how are we defining success? How is Palisades? How is Palisades successful? And so if you could share a little bit more about some of the less obvious successes than champions or celebratory things that have happened, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think I'll begin with a term that I learned early on. So we referred to this population as service averse early on. And I think in my first report, we started coining they were service unstable. So they're individuals living in encampments and moving around a lot. And so the ability to engage with services was highly challenging. Once we saw the population stabilize, 100% of them involved themselves in services. And so we, in that sense, had immediate success that was revealing, surprising and revealing in that we just hadn't seen that before. So I think that's the first part, is just realizing I don't think there's such thing as somebody who says, I don't want help and I don't want to change. It's really about context that they're in that dictates the ability to believe they can change. And so what we saw was a number of people stabilizing in their units that began to believe that. So I shared the story of Derek. We have a number of other clients that are re-engaging with family because of that stability that they're able to now reach out to and stay engaged with their family. It is still a challenging population. And that's a mix. I mean, there's some that have lived on the streets for decades. And I have one client who likes to share with us, we might be off the streets, but the streets aren't out of us. And so there's some work in that. And just understanding that and how to engage with that individual. I want to honor and respect that. At the same time, we're working a program and doing that program development. So a number of, we're seeing some interesting elements is some of our older clients that they've been able to stay safe, stay stable, and engage with services. So one of our probably most challenging client did finally get housed a month ago. And it was all around learning about personal property, hoarding disorder. So having that individual throughout our engagement, push back but engage, and push back but engage, and push back but engage, and it was an interesting dance. And we would talk about it that way. It's like, well, how are we going to dance through this today? And but eventually, I mean, that individual was able to get the support that they needed and get into Andy's place, and is very successfully housed now, and very happy there. So I think that's a good picture. It took time. I mean, I think that was almost a 2-year process, but very successful.
Thanks. One of the stories that I was thinking about that you had shared was that for some clients, just getting to that point of stability is a huge success. And it's to a person, maybe from the outside, it might not seem like a lot, but just to stabilize, to not use medical services as much, emergency services as much, or police and fire, just to like get to a place where they're just stabilized is a huge success for that person. And that's something that should definitely be celebrated by, like, for a success marker of the program, is just to help people get to a place where they are stable.
Yeah,
That's the whole point
yeah.
of it.
I think we can underrate how important stability really is. I think it's something we all assume in our daily lives. And so when you don't have that and you're really just working to survive, which is not really a condition most of us understand what daily survival looks like. When you're working to just survive, you're just working out of stress, and you're making your decisions from stress, and you're just trying to manage that stress. And so none of us, there isn't a single person in this room when you're lacking sleep and you're living high stressed that you would say you made your best decisions ever. That you would even say you made good decisions. Like, it's really challenging in those conditions to make what you would consider healthy, forward-thinking decisions. And so this project is something that really does allow for that stability. So thank you for remembering that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate
Councilor
it.
Joy, did you have questions?
Yeah, and your stats at the end there answered several, so thank you for that. But, and I'm sure off that last conversation you had that they feel safe, which when you're out on the street, you don't feel safe. You can barely, sleep or anything. So, the safety net that you guys have created with this project, I think is really important. So I did have a question on, what we're seeing a lot with the fentanyl use is these folks have to continually be taking this drug. And it's really hard to gauge where it is. It could be a small little pill, but they also have terrible overdoses. And have you guys have had any issues with that?
Sure. Fentanyl use is a major problem at our site. It's one among several related areas, mental health, all the areas that John described. We did have one overdose on site that required the use of Narcan. When I was there, we had clients reporting that they are needing to use Narcan in their units, although we hadn't heard of anything of that. So just since I've been there in this past year, I've used Narcan once on a client who was revived, and then reports from the clients of use of Narcan in their units.
I do think it is surprising that we've only had one. I think that was a surprise to us in the 2 years we've been operating, that one that we know of. I have to be clear. I mean, the clients, they self-manage, and they are a community that supports each other. So there may be others that we don't know of, but we just had the one, and it was definitely in the new vein of multiple treatments of Narcan. That the amount of fentanyl people are taking is higher and harder to recover from. So we definitely have seen that in our population. And we have our policies that help us address that as much as possible. And that's been a part of our learning curve, is how do we try to create an environment where we're keeping people in and not looking for ways to kick them out? And yet still have a safe environment for everybody on the property, for the staff, for the security that's there. Managing all of that is a bit of a learning curve for us that we've done over the years. I think we've gotten really close now to where we're at operating that honors the safety of the clients, it honors the choices in their lives, it honors our staff in a fairly effective way.
Thank you. Did you have a couple quick questions?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Go ahead.
Seconding what Council Member Ryan was speaking about with just the success, and it seems like with our neighbors that the number one concern that they usually have is with the service adverse populations, and that's the most noticeable thing that they notice when it comes to people suffering from homelessness. And so the fact that you're taking on and tackling this with such like a good success level and very like insightful, and all this information is just very, very helpful, I think, going forward and seeing like how valuable this program is. I was wondering if you had any more specific data on like I guess the demographics when it came to like what percentage of the population that you've served actually have substance use disorder, and coinciding mental health issues, how many women, how many are couples, how many have pets, et cetera. Do you have like any more?
I don't know off the top of my head. Now, I thought about all those things as I was
Generalized
prepping for this.
information would be
And I
fine,
thought
too.
you were going to ask me those questions. And unfortunately, I couldn't pull them out of our database in the time that I gave myself to. So I apologize for not
No
having
worries.
them. Because those were some of the questions I had as we worked through the data. So we, as far as pets go, we have a limit of 5 pets on the property and it's kind of arbitrary, but it's also just like we're trying to figure out how you can have pets on the property and not have too many issues. And so we have 3 pets on the property now, I believe.
Dogs, I'm assuming?
1 dog and 2 cats.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Lots of wild rabbits, but they don't count. And we do have like a size limit on how large a pet can be. So we have some that struggle with that. They want larger pets. Allow too large of a pet in those
And
particular
I've heard that be
units.
such a barrier for a lot of folks, is like, I can't go to a shelter because I can't, this pet is my family. And so the fact that that helps cater to that population is just
Yeah.
immense.
It's been really great to be able to say yes and not have to say no.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a nice part for me in that. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't think about male, female. I do this for a living. I should have thought of that. So I apologize. I can't even, I'm racking my brain at the 26. I'd say it's 1/3, 2/3. So 2/3 male, 1/3 female. And if Andrew thinks differently, he'll correct me. It sounds about right. And as far as couples go, we divided couples. So originally they were in the same unit. Then we offered all the couples that came in as couples to have their own units. And so we don't really track that anymore. And I didn't figure out how to get how many clients admitted to substance use at their intake out of my database. So I've got a specialist working on it now to help me figure that one out. It's in there. And so I can certainly get that information. It's a large number.
Okay. Because I guess I'm just curious, like, how much of the population especially have like those mental health issues that they obviously wouldn't be able to have in congregate shelter. And then the next transition to housing is obviously not going to be your regular housing, might be more of like the supportive nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, just wondering kind of what those populations are looking at. And then for the women thing, we have a serious lack of like shower facilities specifically for women in Snohomish County that are unhoused, and not anywhere that I know that they can go that's 24 hours or available, to actually, take a shower. So the fact that you have so many showers on site, are they exclusive to the population you're serving?
Yeah. Yeah. Only the clients are allowed on the property. They're not allowed to have guests.
Okay.
And we don't serve others on that property. So I think some of the ways that it's successful is we have some really
Yeah.
strong boundaries around who's on the property and how the property is managed, the gates, the cameras. And that's a common theme around any project I've talked to. Those are critical.
And my last question, I promise, are there any specific needs that you're seeing, like, going forward that you anticipate would be like the next direction, or what is needed? Is it going to be, if we have a particular partner in this area, this would be very helpful, or there's a lack of the housing at the next step, or we want more units, or, what the next kind of thing or current thing that you're saying is like the big need or two that you guys have?
Feel free to chime in. Mental health support in our community, assessments and long-term support is critical. And
Is CMAR backlogged with the assessments?
it's just challenging to get access to services in that area. It's not impossible. It's just more challenging.
And the weight, I'm assuming.
It is weight, and sometimes it's some of what we've experienced is we can use a lot of like online services, and those aren't the most preferred from our client standpoint. And if you can imagine, if somebody has schizoaffective disorder and delusional ideations, that's a pretty big barrier, doing that online. And we have a number of clients that would either be diagnosed with that or have been diagnosed with those conditions.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I think that's a pretty critical. I mean, the housing one, that's the obvious. Getting people into housing and having enough housing that's really needed. Really needed. I don't. That's a long-term solution in the short run, and helping people, I think, again, stabilize, be comfortable, and move towards some interim goals in managing that. Not to necessarily be housing ready, because I'm not. but certainly to flourish more deeply than they were when they were living on the streets.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for joining today. We are over time. Apologize we didn't get to the shelter update. Could probably punt that to next month, if that'd be okay.
I think I am not around on next month, but absolutely I can send a staff member or provide the information with Jennifer. It's real brief, so I don't, yeah. The one thing that I did want to make.
Send it to us.
Yeah, if you
The-
could send it, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, but I just wanted you to also know that Faith Family Village has set a October 10th date for
great
their
news.
hopeful, what are we calling it? Not groundbreaking,
ribbon
but
cutting?
ribbon cutting, yes.
Yeah,
So
that's wonderful.
That, just have that on your horizon, that is
Yeah,
looking to
spin your
happen.
palette. Great, thanks, Julie. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. It is 6:05 and we are adjourned. Thanks.